It was a bright Monday morning when Maya decided to visit the bank. She carried a small folder in her hand, neat and well organized, with all the necessary documents her father had asked her to deliver. For her, it was just a regular task, nothing too complicated. She had done similar errands before, though never at this particular bank. The building looked huge and fancy from the outside, with tall glass doors that sparkled under the sunlight. People in suits walked in and out, looking busy and important. Maya took a deep breath before stepping inside, reminding herself that she belonged there just as much as anyone else. Inside, the air was cool, and the marble floor reflected the bright lights overhead. Several counters lined the hall, each with employees seated neatly behind computers. Customers stood in small queues, waiting for their turn. Some were talking softly to the tellers, others filling out forms at side tables. The atmosphere felt calm, professional, and maybe a little intimidating for someone walking in alone for the first time. Still, Maya carried herself with confidence. She was used to being independent, and her father trusted her enough to handle this matter. She adjusted her folder under her arm and walked towards the first available counter. Her steps echoed lightly in the hall, but she ignored the sound, focusing instead on completing her task. She didn't notice the glances from a few staff members, who looked up briefly as she approached. To her, it was just a normal day, and she assumed she would be treated like every other customer. When she reached the counter, she smiled politely at the teller, a middle-aged woman with sharp glasses and a stiff expression. Maya greeted her with respect and explained that she had come on behalf of her father to take care of some account details. Her voice was steady, clear, and polite. She expected the Wokdo man to respond with the same courtesy. Instead, the teller gave her a quick up-and-down look, the kind of glance that silently judged a person within seconds. Maya felt a flicker of discomfort, but tried not to think too much of it. Perhaps the woman was just busy or tired. She placed the folder gently on the counter, ready to hand over the papers. As she stood there, she couldn't help but notice the elegant suits and dresses worn by other customers. Many of them seemed like business people, with expensive watches and designer handbags. Compared to them, Maya looked simple in her casual jeans and blouse, but she didn't mind. Her father had always taught her that respect had nothing to do with appearance. A few moments passed in silence as the teller glanced at the folder, then at Maya again. The atmosphere shifted slightly, but Maya remained calm. She had been raised to handle herself with dignity, no matter the situation. She told herself that this was just the beginning of her visit, and soon enough everything would go smoothly. Behind her, the line of customers grew longer. Maya could hear the faint tapping of shoes, the soft shuffling of papers, and the distant ringing of a phone somewhere in the office. All these small sounds mixed together, creating the rhythm of a busy bank morning. She stood patiently, her hands resting lightly on the counter, waiting for the teller's response. At that moment, nothing felt unusual to her. She believed she was just another visitor, doing a small task in a big world where people came and went every day. She didn't yet know how important this visit would become. She had no idea that the way she was about to be treated would change the entire atmosphere of the bank within a few short minutes. To Maya, this was still just an ordinary visit. She thought of her father at home, trusting her to deliver these papers without any problem. She thought of returning quickly, maybe stopping for a snack on the way back, and telling him it was all done. She had no reason to expect anything different. But beneath the surface, something was already shifting. The looks from the staff, the tension in the teller's face, the quiet whispers between employees, all hinted at the storm that was about to break. Maya remained unaware, standing gracefully with her folder, ready to do her job. For her, it was still a simple errand. For the bank, it was about to become a lesson they would never forget. When Maya stood at the counter, she still believed everything would be simple. She believed her father's trust in her was enough to make this errand smooth and quick. But the first impression she received inside the bank was not at all what she expected. The teller, the woman with the sharp glasses, didn't smile back. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her eyes scanned Maya in a way that felt more like judgment than curiosity. She looked at Maya's clothes, her braided hair, the casual shoes she wore, and the folder in her hand. It wasn't just a glance. It was the kind of look that silently says, "You don't belong here." Maya noticed it. She wasn't naive. She had been through moments like this before, in shops, in restaurants, even in school sometimes. But each time, she remembered her father's words. Never let someone else's opinion lower your dignity. You know who you are. So she stood tall, pretending the glance meant nothing. Behind the teller, another staff member leaned over and whispered something. They both chuckled softly, but their eyes kept darting back toward Maya. The laughter was quiet, almost hidden, but it was enough. Maya felt a sting in her chest. She wanted to believe she was overthinking, but the shift in their body language was too obvious to ignore. Other customers in the hall noticed the small scene too. A man in a dark suit turned his head briefly to look at Maya, then back at his phone. A woman with a designer handbag adjusted her scarf and gave a sideways glance, as if wondering why this girl was standing there at all. No one said anything, but the silence itself was heavy. Maya kept her calm. She opened her folder carefully, making sure the papers were aligned, and said again in a clear voice, "I'm here to submit these documents on behalf of my father. He asked me to handle this today." The teller raised her eyebrow and gave a short, but almost mocking laugh. "On behalf of your father? And who exactly is your father?" Her tone was sharp, as if Maya had said something unbelievable. Maya paused for a moment. She had expected to simply give the documents, maybe sign a paper or two and leave. But the teller's question was laced with doubt, as though Maya was trying to claim something she didn't deserve. "My father has an account here," Maya explained politely, her voice steady. "He asked me to drop these off for him. Everything you need is inside the folder." Instead of looking at the documents, the teller leaned back in her chair and smirked. We don't usually accept things from strangers. Do you even have any idea what kind of account this is? This isn't a place where just anyone can walk in and say they're here on behalf of someone important." Her words were not only dismissive, they were insulting. The implication was clear. She didn't believe Maya had any connection to someone who could possibly matter to the bank. To the teller, Maya was just a girl from nowhere, daring to enter a place where, in her eyes, she didn't fit. Maya felt her cheeks warm, but she refused to lower her gaze. She knew her worth, and she knew her father trusted her. Still, the sting of humiliation pressed harder as more staff began to glance in her direction. 2 employees by the side desk whispered again, their faces breaking into small grins. The sound of their laughter wasn't loud, but to Maya, it echoed painfully in the wide marble hall. The line of customers behind her began to grow impatient. Someone coughed deliberately, another tapped their foot. Maya heard a faint voice mutter, "What's taking so long?" She wanted to turn around and explain, but she didn't. She refused to show weakness. Instead, she gently pushed the folder closer to the teller. "If you would just check the documents, you'll see that everything is in order," she said softly but firmly. But the teller didn't even touch the folder. She folded her arms instead and stared at Maya with narrowed eyes. "I think you should step aside. Maybe you're in the wrong bank. This is not the place for unnecessary disturbances." The words cut deeper than Maya expected. She wasn't just being doubted. She was being dismissed, treated as though she was invisible, unworthy, and in the way. For a moment, her hands trembled, but she quickly clasped them together to hide it. She remembered her father's lessons again. When people underestimate you, don't argue. Just let the truth reveal itself. Your dignity is more powerful than their ignorance. Those words played in her mind like a shield. So Maya didn't back down. She didn't raise her voice, but she also didn't leave. She stood right there at the counter, calm but unshaken, even as the teller rolled her eyes and sighed loudly, as if dealing with her was a waste of time. The atmosphere in the bank grew thicker, heavier, as though everyone was waiting for what would happen next. To Maya, it felt like all the eyes, yes, were on her, silently questioning her place there. It was no longer just a visit. It was the beginning of something she hadn't planned for, a test of her patience, her pride, and her strength. And though Maya didn't know it yet, the arrogance of that first impression was about to collapse in the most dramatic way possible. The silence between Maya and the teller grew heavy. The teller tapped her pen against the counter impatiently, as though Maya's presence was disturbing her rhythm for the day. She leaned forward just enough to lower her voice, but the sharpness of her tone carried across the hall. "Listen, young lady," she said, her lips curling into a half-smile that wasn't friendly. "We don't usually waste time with situations like this. These kinds of documents are handled only by serious clients, not by children pretending to do business for their so-called parents." The words hung in the air, cruel and dismissive. Maya felt the weight of every syllable, as if each one was meant to push her further down into the ground. The sting wasn't only in the words, it was in the way the teller spoke, as though Maya had no value, no reason to be standing there. But Maya didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that sometimes silence was more powerful than quick replies. She stood tall, her chin slightly lifted, her eyes steady. She slid the folder closer once again, her hand firm and graceful. "Everything is in order," she said simply. "If you check, you'll see that my father's name and signature are all there." The teller chuckled softly, shaking her head. She didn't even bother opening the folder. Instead, she turned to her colleague at the next counter, a younger man with slick hair and a polished tie. "Can you believe this?" she said loudly enough for others to hear. "A little girl comes in here claiming she's doing business for her father. Next thing you know, people will start saying they own the place." The young man laughed under his breath. He tilted his head toward Maya, giving her a quick, mocking smile. "Maybe she saw too many movies," he whispered back, not low enough to hide it. Maya felt the heat rise in her chest. Their laughter wasn't just about her. It was about what they thought she represented. To them, she was out of place, unworthy of standing in a hall reserved, in their minds, for the important people. The teller turned back to Maya, her voice sharp now. "Why don't you run along, dear? Go home. Tell your father that if he really has business with us, he should come himself. We don't entertain messengers." The word messenger hit Maya like a slap. It was said with such disdain, as though she was nothing more than a servant. An errand girl who dared to step into a space meant for others. The humiliation grew worse when a man standing in line behind her muttered, "She's holding up the queue. Some of us have real work to do." The comment made a few others nod in quiet agreement. Maya could feel their eyes pressing into her back. It was as if everyone had already decided she didn't belong. Her throat tightened, but she refused to let her emotions show. She remembered her father's steady voice. "When the world tries to humiliate you, hold on to your silence. Respect yourself, even if others don't. Truth will always find its way to the surface." Maya looked directly at the teller. "With all due respect, I am not leaving without doing what I came for. Please check the documents. That is your job." The teller scoffed, leaning back in her chair with exaggerated disbelief. "Your attitude won't help you here, little girl. You think you can walk into this bank, demand service, and act like you're important? Do you know how many people stand in this line every day? People with money, people with real accounts. Not whatever this is." She gestured dismissively at the folder as if it contained scraps of paper. The young man at the next counter snorted. "She probably just printed something at home. Maybe it's a prank." Maya's heart pounded, but her face remained calm. Every word they spoke was meant to humiliate her, to make her feel small. Yet deep down, she knew something they didn't. She knew the truth that would soon silence their arrogance. That thought gave her strength. A woman in the back of the line leaned forward, curious. "What's going on?" she whispered to another customer. Slowly, the story spread around the hall. A young girl claiming to handle her father's bank matters, being mocked by the staff. People began to watch closely, some out of pity, others out of amusement. The teller finally pushed the folder back toward Maya, not even opening it. "I'm done with this nonsense," she said coldly. "If you don't leave, I'll have to call security. We don't have time to play games." The word security made a ripple pass through the room. A guard standing near the door straightened his back, watching the exchange more carefully now. The situation was escalating, and everyone could feel it. Maya's hands trembled slightly, but she clenched them tightly at her sides. She wanted to shout, to tell them exactly who her father was, but she stopped herself. She remembered again, never use your name as a weapon. Let respect come from truth, not from pride. So she stood silently for a moment, her eyes steady, her breath calm. Then, without raising her voice, she said, "If you really believe I don't belong here, then perhaps I should call my father and let him explain things to you directly." The teller raised her eyebrows, smirking. "Oh, by all means, call him. Let's see what story you come up with next." The young man chuckled. "This should be interesting. Maybe her dad is the president now." The customers around them chuckled lightly, shaking their heads. Some pitied H.R., others simply enjoyed the drama. To them, Maya looked like a child about to embarrass herself even further. But Maya knew better. The storm was about to turn. What had begun as humiliation was soon to become revelation. The very people mocking her would soon eat their words. She picked up her phone with calm, steady fingers. For the first time, the teller's smile faltered just slightly, though she tried to hide it. The entire bank seemed to hold its breath as Maya dialed the number. The dismissive treatment was about to end. The phone felt heavy in Maya's hand, but she held it steady. The teller folded her arms, leaning back in her chair with an expression that screamed disbelief. Her smirk lingered as if she already knew the outcome. Around the bank hall, customers leaned in just a little closer, eager to see what this young girl would do next. Maya dialed her father's number, but before she could even press the call button, the teller's voice cut through the silence. "Really?" the woman scoffed. "You're going to call Daddy now? What's he going to do? Rush over here and scold us for not playing along with your little story?" Her voice was louder now, carrying across the marble hall. The young man at the next counter laughed openly this time. "Careful," he teased. "She might say her father owns the whole bank." His words were dripping with sarcasm, and his laughter set off a ripple among a few customers who chuckled under their breath. Maya's fingers froze on the keypad, not because she was afraid, but because she realized what was happening. This was no longer just about documents. It was turning into a public spectacle. The teller leaned closer to her colleague, pretending to whisper, but making sure Maya heard every word. "Kids these days," she said mockingly, "always making up stories. Next, she'll claim she's royalty." The colleague grinned. "Or maybe she's the president's daughter." They both laughed, their voices echoing loudly across the hall. The sound of their laughter pierced Maya's heart. She wasn't just being doubted now, she was being humiliated in front of strangers. Customers in line were no longer silent. Some whispered to each other, pointing discreetly at her. Others shook their heads impatiently. "She's wasting everyone's time," one man muttered. "Just a kid causing drama," another woman said under her breath. "Security should escort her out," someone added loudly. Enough for Maya to hear. Each comment was like a needle. Maya could feel her chest tightening, but she refused to let tears form in her eyes. She stood straight, her chin lifted, her hand still gripping the folder that held her father's documents. Inside, she was screaming, but on the outside, she wore a mask of calm. The teller took advantage of the moment. She leaned forward again, her voice cutting through the air. "Look, sweetheart, this is a bank, not a playground. We don't have time for children's games. If you really want to play adult, go home and practice with dolls. Leave the real work to people who belong here." The words stung deeper than anything Maya had heard so far. A few customers laughed. Others smirked. The humiliation was no longer hidden. It was public, deliberate, and cruel. The security guard near the entrance took a step forward, watching more carefully now. He didn't intervene yet, but his hand rested on his belt as if preparing to escort her out at any moment. Maya took a deep breath. Her father's voice echoed again in her mind. When people try to strip away your dignity, remember, it can only be taken if you hand it over. So she didn't argue. She didn't shout or defend herself with the truth that could silence them all in an instant. Instead, she stood with quiet strength, her silence louder than their insults. But silence in that moment only fueled their arrogance. The teller waved her hand dismissively. Enough. Step aside before I call security. There are real customers waiting, important customers. The man behind Maya grumbled. Finally! I thought she'd never leave. He rolled his eyes and muttered something about kids these days. Maya's throat tightened, but she steadied her breathing. She knew she had the power to end this embarrassment in seconds, but her father had always taught her patience. Let them laugh. Let them moan. Awk. The truth would arrive soon enough, and when it did, it would not be quiet. It would thunder. Still, the pain of standing there, ridiculed and doubted, pressed on her like a weight. She clutched the folder tighter, her knuckles whitening. For a brief moment, she thought about walking away, not because she was weak, but because she didn't want to give them the satisfaction of laughing further. But then she remembered the reason she was there. Her father trusted her. This was more than just a task. It was a test of her strength, her composure, and her dignity. If she walked away now, she would let their mockery define her. So Maya took a small step forward, her eyes locked on the teller. I told you, she said quietly but firmly. If you have any doubts, call my father yourself. His number is right there in the documents. You'll see, I'm not lying. Her words, though soft, carried a power that silenced the immediate laughter for a moment. The teller blinked, caught off guard by Maya's calm defiance. But pride was a dangerous thing, and instead of admitting doubt, she scoffed even louder. Oh, please, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. As if I have time to call random numbers written on a piece of paper. Do you think we're fools? The young man leaned over, grinning. Maybe we should let her call. Could be entertaining. The teller chuckled and shrugged. Go ahead, sweetheart. Call your father. Let's all enjoy the show. The customers laughed again, this time openly, as if Maya were part of a performance staged for their amusement. The humiliation was now complete. Every eye in the hall was on her, waiting to see her fail, waiting for her lie to collapse. But what they didn't know was that every second they mocked her, every insult they threw, was only building up to their own humiliation. The truth was closer than they realized. Maya lifted her phone again, her hands calm this time. With steady fingers, she began to dial the number, the room fee. All into a strange silence, a silence heavy with arrogance and disbelief. They thought they were about to witness her defeat, but in reality, they were seconds away from witnessing their own downfall. The air inside the bank felt heavier than before. Every eye was fixed on Maya as she held the phone in her hand. The teller leaned forward with that same mocking smirk, tapping her long fingernails on the desk as though keeping time with the girl's humiliation. The young man at the next counter grinned eagerly, waiting for her to embarrass herself further. Even the customers had grown quiet now, their earlier whispers replaced by a strange curiosity. Maya didn't rush. She dialed her father's number calmly, letting each beep of the keypad echo in the hall. Her heart was steady now. The anger and humiliation that had burned inside her moments ago had settled into something else, something her father had taught her: patience. But before pressing the call button, she lowered the phone slightly and looked directly at the teller. Her voice was low but clear, every word deliberate. I think you should be very careful with how you're treating me right now, she said softly. The teller's smirk widened. Careful? Of what? A little girl with a phone? Her laughter was sharp, and her colleague joined in immediately. Listen to her, the man said, chuckling. She's giving us warnings now. What's next? Is her father going to arrive in a helicopter? A few customers laughed under their breath, their amusement cruel and shallow. But Maya didn't flinch. Her calmness unsettled some of them, though they didn't admit it. She placed the phone on the counter gently, not as a threat, but as a sign that she wasn't desperate. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she continued, her eyes unwavering. "All I asked was for you to check the documents. I gave you the chance to treat me with respect. If you had done that, this would have been finished already. But you've chosen to humiliate me instead. I'm warning you, when the truth comes out, you're going to regret the way you're acting right now." Her words weren't loud, they weren't angry, but the weight behind them was undeniable. For the first time, the teller hesitated. The confidence in her smirk cracked just slightly. It was a tiny flicker of doubt, but pride made her bury it quickly. "Oh, please," she scoffed, waving her hand. "Enough of the drama. You've had your little moment. Now step aside before I really call security." The guard near the entrance shifted again, his eyes narrowing on Maya. He hadn't moved closer yet, but his posture was tense, ready. The young man at the next counter leaned forward, grinning. "You heard her, kid. Take your warning somewhere else. This is a bank, not a theater." The laughter returned, though quieter this time. A few customers, however, exchanged uneasy glances. Something in Maya's steady composure was different from what they expected. She didn't look like a girl lying or pretending. She looked like someone who knew exactly what she was saying. Maya looked around the room. She saw the faces watching her, some mocking, some doubtful, and a few showing a spark of sympathy. She drew in a deep breath and let it out slowly. Then she picked up her phone again. "I'll give you one last chance," she said firmly. "Check the folder. If you still don't believe me, then I'll make the call. But once I do, this entire conversation will be remembered, not by me, but by you." The teller rolled her eyes dramatically, but her hand twitched slightly, betraying a flicker of nerves. Pride kept her from reaching for the folder. "We don't take orders from children," she said coldly. "Call whoever you want. It won't change the fact that you don't belong here." The words were harsher than ever, but they sounded weaker now, forced. Maya caught the change, and it gave her strength. She pressed the call button and lifted the phone to her ear. As the ringing tone echoed softly, the bank hall seemed to freeze. Customers shifted on their feet, leaning just a little closer to catch what would happen. The teller tapped her pen again, this time faster, betraying her nervousness. "Daddy to the rescue," the young man whispered mockingly. But his grin didn't feel as confident as before. The ringing ended, and her father's calm, deep voice answered. Maya spoke quietly, so only those near the counter could hear. "Hi, Dad. I'm at the bank, like you asked. But there seems to be a problem. The staff here don't believe I have the right to deliver your documents." She paused, her eyes still locked on the teller. "Yes, I warned them, but they refused to check anything." Her father's voice on the other end was calm but firm. Maya's eyes softened as she listened, then she nodded slightly. "All right, I'll wait." She ended the call, placing the phone back on the counter with deliberate calmness. The teller leaned forward, trying to mask her unease with sarcasm. "And what did Daddy say? Is he sending a magic wand?" she asked with a forced laugh. Maya didn't smile, didn't frown. She simply met the woman's eyes and said, "He's on his way." The words were quiet, but they hit the room like thunder. The teller blinked. The young man stopped grinning. Even a few customers stirred, suddenly curious. The security guard's stance shifted again, this time less aggressive, more uncertain. Maya stood tall, her hands folded gently over the folder. She had given them her warning, and now the truth was on its way. Every second that passed would only make their eventual regret heavier. The hall fell into a strange silence, broken only by the soft tapping of the teller's nervous fingers. For the first time since Maya had walked in, the balance of power had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The humiliation they had thrown at her was about to turn into their own. The minutes that followed Maya's warning stretched like hours. The bank, once filled with the soft hum of conversations, had grown strangely quiet. Even the usual sounds, the shuffle of papers, the clicking of keyboards, the low murmur of customers, seemed to pause, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Maya stood calmly at the counter, her folder still resting beneath her hands. Her phone lay beside it, silent now, yet heavy with the memory of the call she had just made. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't trembling. Her stillness itself was unsettling to the staff who had mocked her only moments earlier. The teller, however, tried to maintain her authority. She adjusted her glasses and gave a forced laugh, glancing at her colleague. "Really? She says her father is on his way now," she said, loud enough for others to hear. "Well, I suppose we should all prepare for a king's arrival." Her colleague smirked nervously, but this time his laughter didn't sound so confident. He had seen something in Maya's eyes, something steady, something unshaken, that made him wonder if she truly knew something they didn't. The customers, too, were restless. Whispers began circling the hall. "Do you think her father's really coming?" one man muttered. "She sounded serious," another replied. "Oh, please," a woman scoffed. "It's probably just another trick. Kids these days." Yet even those who doubted her couldn't take their eyes off the girl who stood with such quiet dignity, waiting. The security guard near the entrance shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He had been ready to escort Maya out minutes ago, but now uncertainty tugged at him. Something about the way she had spoken, the calmness in her warning. It wasn't the tone of a liar. Then, without warning, the large glass doors at the front of the bank swung open, the sound of polished shoes striking the marble. Floor echoed sharply through the hall. Heads turned instantly. A tall man in an elegant suit walked inside, his presence commanding the room without a single word. His steps were firm, his gaze steady, and there was something about the way he carried himself that made people step aside instinctively, even before they knew who he was. The teller froze. Her pen slipped from her hand and rolled across the counter. The young man beside her straightened his posture suddenly, his grin vanishing. Even the security guard stiffened, his hand dropping from his belt as he recognized the figure walking in. Maya's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of triumph, but of relief. She had been patient, and now the truth was here. The man's eyes scanned the room before landing on his daughter. He walked directly toward her, ignoring the whispers that now filled the bank. "Sweetheart," he said warmly, his voice calm, yet full of authority. "I came as soon as you called. Are you all right?" Maya nodded softly. "Yes, Dad. But they—" She glanced at the teller, her voice trailing off. She didn't need to finish the sentence. The look in her eyes said everything. The teller's face turned pale. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead as realization dawned. The man standing before them was not just another customer. She had seen him before, in company meetings, in framed photos hanging in the bank's private offices, in the stories whispered among employees. He wasn't just Maya's father. He was the owner of the bank. Her throat went dry. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. The man turned his calm but piercing gaze toward the teller. "I believe my daughter was trying to submit documents on my behalf," he said, his tone even but sharp as steel. "Why was she treated otherwise?" The teller stammered, her earlier arrogance gone. Sir, I didn't realize. I thought—" Her words broke into fragments. Her eyes darted around, looking for support, but found none. Her colleague looked just as pale, avoiding eye contact entirely. The customers whispered louder now, their earlier amusement replaced by shock. "Wait, he's the owner? Did she just call him Dad? Oh my God, no wonder she was so calm." The security guard bowed his head slightly, embarrassed at having been seconds away from removing the owner's daughter. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor. Maya's father looked back at her, his voice gentle. "You handled yourself well. I told you patience always reveals the truth." Maya smiled faintly, her eyes bright with pride. She hadn't needed to raise her voice or reveal his name. She had stood her ground with dignity, and now the truth spoke louder than anything else. The teller, meanwhile, was trembling. "Sir, I didn't mean—" She tried to explain, but her words dissolved under his gaze. "You didn't mean to treat her with respect?" he asked quietly, his tone cutting through the silence like a blade. You didn't mean to give her the courtesy you would give any other customer? Tell me, what exactly did you mean?" The teller's lips quivered. No excuse seemed good enough. The man glanced around the room, his voice rising slightly, not in anger, but in clarity. "Every single person who walks into this bank deserves dignity. Whether they wear a suit or simple clothes, whether they come for a small deposit or a large business deal, it does not matter. Respect is the foundation of trust. And without trust, a bank is nothing." His words echoed across the marble hall. Some customers lowered their heads, ashamed of their whispers. Others nodded silently, realizing the weight of the lesson. Maya stood a little taller beside her father. The humiliation she had endured only minutes ago had now transformed into respect, not just for her, but for the values her father lived by. The teller, pale and speechless, lowered her gaze, her arrogance crumbling into silence. The colleague beside her shifted uncomfortably, wishing he could disappear. And in that moment, the entire bank understood. They had not just mocked a young girl, they had mocked the daughter of the very man who owned the building they stood in. But more importantly, they had mocked someone who deserved respect long before her father's identity was revealed. The bank was so silent that even the faint buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed loud. The once busy hall, filled with chatter, footsteps, and clicking keyboards, had now frozen into stillness. Every pair of eyes was fixed on the tall man standing beside Maya, the very man who had just shattered the illusion that she was out of place. The teller's mouth hung slightly open, her glasses slipping down the bridge of her nose. Her hands trembled as she tried to pick up the pen she had dropped earlier, but it rolled off the desk and clattered onto the floor. She didn't even bother reaching for it. Her face, once sharp with arrogance, was pale now, drained of color. The young man at the next counter swallowed hard, his grin long gone. He adjusted his tie nervously, looking anywhere but at Maya or her father. The mockery in his eyes had disappeared, replaced by the kind of fear that comes when someone realizes they've made a grave mistake. Maya's father didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His very presence commanded attention. He looked around the room slowly, his gaze sweeping across the staff, the security guard, and even the customers. His words came out calm, but carried the weight of authority that no one dared to challenge. "I am the owner of this bank," he said firmly. "Every chair you sit on, every counter you work behind, every wall you see here, it belongs to me. And yet my daughter, who came here on my behalf, was treated as though she were less than nothing." The teller's knees felt weak. She wanted to speak, to explain herself, but no words came. Her throat was dry and her mind blank. The truth had stripped away her pride completely. Maya stood silently beside her father, her head high. She didn't need to say a word. The truth had spoken for her. Her father continued, his voice steady and controlled. "I didn't build this bank on arrogance. I built it on trust, service, and dignity. Every single customer who walks through these doors, whether they are rich or poor, young or old, deserves respect. That is the first rule of business. That is the first rule of humanity." His words echoed through the marble hall, bouncing off the walls and settling deep into the hearts of everyone who heard them. Even the customers who had whispered against Maya earlier lowered their heads, ashamed of their own assumptions. The security guard cleared his throat, his face red with embarrassment. Only minutes ago, he had been ready to escort Maya out, thinking she was causing trouble. Now he stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the floor, silently praying no one would call out his eagerness to act against the boss's daughter. Maya's father turned his gaze back to the teller, whose hands were now clasped tightly together, her knuckles white. "Tell me," he asked quietly but firmly, "why did you mock her? Why did you refuse to even look at the documents she brought?" The teller's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, she muttered, I didn't know who she was." Her father leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp. "And if she had not been my daughter, would that have made your behavior acceptable? Would it have been all right to humiliate a customer simply because of how she looked, or because you judged she wasn't important enough? The teller's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head quickly, desperate to escape the weight of his gaze. But she knew the truth. It wasn't about not knowing. It was about arrogance. It was about prejudice. Maya's father straightened his suit jacket, his voice rising slightly, not in anger, but in clarity. This is not about my daughter alone. This is about the principle. Respect should never depend on status, wealth, or appearance. If you cannot treat every person who walks into this bank with dignity, then you do not deserve to work here. The teller's tears spilled over, her face burning with shame. The young man at the next counter looked down at his shoes, wishing he could disappear. Neither of them dared to argue. The customers watched silently, many of them moved by the power of his words. Some nodded slowly, realizing the truth in what he said. A woman in the back whispered, "He's right. Respect should never have conditions." Maya looked up at her father, her chest swelling with pride. Not because he was powerful, not because he owned the bank, but because he had used his position not to crush, but to teach. Her father turned once more to the staff. "Today, you embarrassed my daughter, but more than that, you embarrassed yourselves. You forgot the very foundation of service. You forgot humanity. Let this be the last time such behavior happens in my bank." The teller nodded quickly, her tears dropping onto the counter. "Yes, sir. I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. The young man muttered too, barely audible, "Forgive me, sir. It won't happen again." Maya's father didn't reply to their apologies. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was punishment enough. He placed a gentle hand on Maya's shoulder. "Come, sweetheart," he said softly. "We have nothing more to do here." Maya picked up the folder, her hands steady. She looked around the room one last time, her eyes meeting those of the people who had mocked her only minutes ago. She didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply walked beside her father, her head held high, the dignity she had carried from the start shining brighter than ever. As they walked toward the exit, the crowd of customers stepped aside respectfully, creating a clear path. The same people who had whispered against her now watched her with silent admiration. The glass doors opened again, and father and daughter stepped out into the bright sunlight, leaving behind a hall full of people who had learned a lesson they would not soon forget. Inside, the teller sank into her chair, her hands covering her face. The young man leaned back, staring at the ceiling, ashamed. And in the silence that followed, the weight of the truth lingered like a shadow that would not lift.